There comes a moment in every person's life when you simply stop explaining. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally understood that truth doesn't require an audience to exist. You've spent years trying to make others see your intentions. You've twisted words, softened your tone, replayed conversations in your mind, all in the hope that someone might finally say, "I get you." But they never fully did. And that hurts more deeply than most admit. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But here's the quiet tragedy. Before we can become who we are, we spend half our lives explaining why we are. To parents, to friends, to partners, to strangers who mistake our silence for arrogance or our distance for indifference. And so we explain, until the explaining itself becomes a cage, every sentence a small negotiation for acceptance. But one day, something changes. You begin to realize that understanding can't be forced into others. You start to see that people only meet you at the depth they've met themselves. And no matter how clearly you speak, if someone is trapped inside their own projections, they will only hear the echo of their own fears. That's the day you stop trying to be understood and start focusing on understanding yourself. This is where Jung's idea of individuation begins, the process of becoming whole. It's not about explaining your worth to others. It's about listening to the voice within you that has been drowned out by noise, comparison, and performance. Silence, in this sense, isn't retreat, it's revelation. Because only when the world grows quiet do you start to hear the truth that was whispering inside all along. And that's where transformation begins, not with more noise, but with stillness. In this stillness, something powerful starts to awaken, a strength that no validation could ever replace. Let's explore what really happens when you choose silence. When you stop speaking just to be understood, you begin to hear life differently. At first, silence feels uncomfortable, like standing in an empty room after years of noise. But soon, you realize it's not emptiness you're hearing. It's yourself. In psychology, silence is often mistaken for avoidance, but Carl Jung saw it as a gateway. He believed that within stillness lies the voice of the unconscious, the deeper self that knows far more than the mind ever will. Every unspoken word becomes a reflection. Every pause a conversation between your outer persona and your inner truth. Modern neuroscience even supports this idea. Studies from Harvard and Stanford show that silence activates the brain's default mode network, the region linked to memory, empathy, and self-awareness. In quiet moments, the brain doesn't shut off. It heals, integrates, and rewires itself. So the silence that once felt like isolation becomes restoration. There's also a hidden power dynamic in silence. The one who can stay calm in the storm is not disengaged. They're in control. When others speak to react, you listen to understand. And that difference changes everything. In Jungian terms, this is how you begin to integrate the shadow, that repressed part of yourself that holds emotion, impulse, and instinct. By observing it without judgment, you stop letting it control you. Imagine a heated argument. Two people shouting, both desperate to be right. But one stays silent, not in defeat, but in awareness. That silence disarms chaos. It reveals who's driven by ego and who's ruled by understanding. Jung wrote that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And silence is the space where that unconscious finally speaks. You begin to notice patterns, desires, fears, all the invisible forces that shaped your reaction. What once seemed like coincidence now feels like a message. What once felt like confusion becomes clarity. And as this awareness grows, your silence stops being passive. It becomes active energy, a quiet that commands respect without demanding attention. This is the point where silence shifts from protection to power. You no longer need to explain, prove, or defend. You've learned that presence, not words, carries the real weight. But there's another transformation happening beneath this stillness. When you pull your focus inward, the world begins to rearrange around you. And that's where true self-focus begins, not as selfishness, but as awakening. When you start focusing on yourself, the world often misunderstands. People call it selfishness, arrogance, distance. But they rarely see that what's actually happening is healing. You are returning energy that was never meant to be scattered everywhere, but within. For so long, you've been trained to measure your worth by how much you give, your time, your patience, your emotional labor. You've been told that putting yourself first is wrong, that love means self-sacrifice, and virtue means exhaustion. But as Jung taught, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. And part of that pain is realizing how much of your life was lived trying to keep others comfortable while you quietly withered. Focusing on yourself is not rejection of others, it's reconnection with your center. It means you stop pouring from an empty cup. It means you start listening to the quiet signals your body and mind have been sending all along. The fatigue that asked for rest, the anxiety that begged for honesty, the resentment that whispered, "You're giving too much." Jung often spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to adapt to society. It's necessary, but dangerous when mistaken for the self. Many people live their entire lives inside that mask, smiling, agreeable, endlessly available, never realizing that their truest self has been standing silently in the background. When you start focusing inward, you begin peeling away that persona layer by layer. You stop asking, "Who do they need me to be?" and start asking, "Who am I when I'm alone?" It's in that solitude that awakening begins. Because solitude isn't loneliness, it's communion with your authentic self. And when you nurture that self, something profound happens. You stop chasing approval. You stop mistaking noise for connection. You stop seeking mirrors to confirm your reflection, because you finally see yourself clearly. Focusing on yourself doesn't mean the world disappears. It means you can now engage with it whole. And that wholeness changes everything you touch. Like a tree that no longer strains to grow branches before strengthening its roots, you now expand from a place of grounded power. Your silence, your solitude, your focus. These are not barriers. They are beginnings. And soon, you'll notice something strange. When your inner world changes, the outer world begins to follow. Circumstances shift, people drift, opportunities emerge, all aligning with your new energy. That's not coincidence. It's synchronicity, Jung's most mysterious and beautiful idea. At first, it feels like nothing is happening. You've stepped back, withdrawn, stayed silent. You've started focusing inward. But outside, the world looks unchanged. Days pass. The same faces, the same problem. And yet, beneath that still surface, something invisible has started to move. Carl Jung called it synchronicity, the meeting of inner transformation and outer reality. It's the uncanny sense that the universe is responding to your inner state. When you shift your perception, the world reflects it back. Not through magic, but through alignment. When you were lost in noise, you attracted noise, arguments, confusion, disarray. But when you learned silence, you started noticing patterns instead of problems. The mind that once saw obstacles now sees timing. The delay that once frustrated you begins to feel intentional, a form of divine pacing. This is the paradox Jung hinted at. When you stop forcing life to move, life begins to move around you. Modern psychology even supports this through the reticular activating system, the brain's filter for perception. When your inner focus changes, your attention changes. You begin noticing different opportunities, different people, different symbols, not because they just appeared, but because your awareness finally became clear enough to see them. It's like cleaning a fogged mirror. The world didn't change, you did. And your clarity now reflects itself back in every encounter. Suddenly, the right person enters your life. The job, the breakthrough, the calm, all appearing not as coincidence, but as consequence. Jung described this as the psyche's dialogue with reality. The outer world mirrors the state of the inner. As above, so below. As within, so without. But here's what most people miss. Synchronicity doesn't reward control. It rewards alignment. It begins the moment you stop chasing what isn't yours and start honoring what is. The moment you stop begging for signs, you become the sign. Because your energy, quiet, focused, and real, starts speaking a language the universe understands. And that language is frequency, not words. So when you start to heal, people who cannot match that healing naturally drift away. Not because they're bad, but because they're vibrating in a different story. And as painful as that feels, it's proof that life is rearranging itself to match your truth. It's no longer about controlling outcome. It's about trusting that the unseen order is already forming around your inner one. The more you choose peace over reaction, authenticity over approval, and patience over panic, the more the world quietly falls into rhythm with you. And in that harmony, you realize what you were chasing was never outside you. It was always waiting for you to come home to yourself. But this journey doesn't end with awareness. It deepens into a new kind of peace, a stillness that no chaos can disturb. When you stop explaining, when you grow silent, when you turn inward, you begin to touch something ancient within you. A calm that doesn't depend on outcomes, noise, or approval. A knowing that simply says, "I am enough, even here." Carl Jung believed that every soul carries a blueprint, an instinct toward wholeness. He called it the self, not the ego that seeks attention, but the deeper center that seeks harmony. And silence is how that self speaks. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply waits, patiently, for you to listen. When you finally do, the world stops being a battlefield and becomes a mirror. The people who trigger you now reveal lessons. The delays that frustrate you reveal protection. And the loneliness you once feared becomes sacred solitude, the space where your spirit breathes again. The truth is, silence and self-focus don't make you distant. They make you clear. You stop confusing chaos for passion, noise for importance, and approval for love. You start sensing what deserves your attention and what no longer does. And in that clarity, everything begins to fall into place. Not because the world bends to your will, but because your will is no longer fighting the world. Psychologists call this self-regulation. Mystics call it surrender. Jung called it individuation. But in the end, they all point to the same truth. Peace begins the moment you stop looking outward for alignment and start creating it within. So take moments of silence, even short one. Walk without your phone. Breathe without rushing. Let your thoughts rise and fall without chasing them. That's how you return to yourself, again and again. And when you do, you'll notice something miraculous. The world around you no longer feels like an enemy to survive, but a rhythm to move with. Because when you focus on yourself, when you stay silent, when you listen instead of chase, everything slowly, beautifully falls into place.